So I knew that they were going to ask me about all the top 10. So I decided I'm going to do one on XRP. Okay. And what was crazy is that I had done so many of these, and all these blockchains were pretty much the same. It was like ice cream flavors, like they're all ice cream, but one's got nuts, one's got cookies in it, whatever.
I love that description, Molly, because I think for people who don't understand it, that says it all. You know what I mean? Like, that's a great analogy.
Thank you. And there aren't tremendous differences between like Avalanche and Solana, for example. They have their nuances, but ultimately they are fast blockchains that have certain technical features and a way of, keeping the accounting ledgers updated. There wasn't too much difference. And then I get to XRP and I immediately find two things. One is this scandal called Eth Gate. And the other one is this very controversial thing called the XRP buyback. And I was fascinated because none of these other blockchains had any like juicy scandals. They were actually kind of boring for the most part. So I was like, wow, this is interesting. We have some drama here, like what's going on? And so I dug deeply into understanding like, what is this Eth Gate scandal? I've now been in a documentary along with my business partner, Jimmy Valley, about this Eth Gate scandal. So it's funny that it was one of the first things I found regarding XRP, and also Jimmy's XRP buyback. And so what had happened, just to kind of catch people up on it, is as this blockchain technology was being built, the banking system was aware that their technology is very outdated. It's actually hundreds of years old for the most part.
Before we get started, folks, make sure you hit the pause button. Okay, go down below. There's a Rumble link. Go over to Rumble and follow us over there. QFS1776.com is, without question, the holy grail of what's to come. Okay, T-shirts. You got to get yourself decorated. This way people will ask you, what is XRP? What is the quantum financial system? What is this? What is that? And you send them where? To QFS1776.com, where they need to immerse themselves, because we're going to burn down this system down to the ground. And out of the ashes will rise the phoenix. There'll be nothing to go back to. Believe me when I tell you that. Also, our Telegram groups down below. If you want to learn what's coming and you're sort of a little scared, I understand. Believe me, I was there too at one point. And if you need more than $10,000 worth of XRP or $1 million worth of XRP, you come see me. Send me an email at QFS1776@gmail, and we'll get you as much as you want. Gold and silver. Welcome to CarminesGold.com. Don't waste not even a second looking. Cheaper prices just don't exist. How important is it for you to own gold and silver right now? What does it mean to me personally? There's an economy that's about to crash beyond what words can explain. In 5 words, I'm going to educate you on gold and silver. Are you ready? You need to own some. Simple.
Hi, Elisa V here. Did you know that medical bills are the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States, accounting for 66.5% of bankruptcies? In fact, in 2022, 17% of adults with healthcare debt either declared bankruptcy or lost their homes due to it. We can all agree that the healthcare system is broken. Well, there is an alternative that I want to tell you about. It is Impact Health Sharing, which Yahoo News is calling the disruptor in the $4.6 trillion healthcare system. With Impact Health Sharing, you can choose the doctors, clinics, and naturopaths that you want with less restrictive guidelines. Medical bills are reduced to their fair market value, and premiums are 30 to 72% cheaper than competitors. Plus, Impact Health incentivizes healthy habits like supplements, gym visits, and therapy. Call 844-275-1056 and use the code MELCARMINE for a free quote today. Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Mel Carmine Show. My name is Elisa Valentino, better known as Elisa V, the Queen of High Vibe, from my podcast, The High Vibe Show. And I have the honor of sitting in for Mel once again. I will be joining you guys as guest host over the coming weeks. Hopefully, I will be here a couple of times a week to bring you insightful discussions on some of the most intriguing topics of our time, including the upcoming Quantum Summit the quantum financial system, and quantum health. And we always love to hear your thoughts, so please share them below. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you enjoyed it. Now, I want you to look at the description box below because, as you know, we are coming close to the Quantum Summit 2. This is going to be taking place March 7th and 8th in Cape Canaveral, and the tickets are really going fast. It's going to be an amazing event, and there are going to be some pretty informative bits of information that you're going to gather from this. This whole summit is going to be more of a celebration than anything else because we have distinguished contributors. There's going to be collaborators aligned with the Envision Trump RFK administration, and we'll be presenting all kinds of initiatives at the summit aimed at what's going to be the future of this great country when it comes to our health and the financial system. So please, tickets are going fast. I am honored to be one of the co-MCs of this event, and I look forward to seeing you there. For more information and to get your tickets, go to quantumsummit1776.com. Now, without further delay, we're going to start our show and our conversation with today's guest, Molly Elmore. Hi, Molly.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
I'm good. Now, Molly, for any of you who do not already follow her, is a partner at the leading digital asset investment bank with a focus on educating people about the new monetary system that runs on the blockchain. And she will also be the other half of the MC team at the Quantum Summit in March. So glad to have you here today, Molly. How's everything
Thank
going with
you.
you?
Going wonderful. Happy to be here. I appreciate it.
Yes. So why don't we just start with taking a bird's eye view of what's going on right now in the financial system? Can you give us like a little bit of insight into that?
Sure. So for the past couple of years, after a career as a business coach, I kind of morphed into the blockchain world. What actually happened was I was coaching people about selling physical products, actually soap and bath products. And I had a bunch of clients who had like sort of emotional issues about charging too much. Like they didn't feel they were good enough to charge a high price point for their products, even though the products were great. And I didn't really know what to do about this. And a coach I had at the time made a suggestion. He said, if you really knew where our money comes from, you wouldn't tie your own sense of like self-worth into it. And I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean where the money comes from? And I realized I'd never thought about like, where do dollars come from? And it's true, as a society and as culture, we often give like more respect to people who have a lot of money and less respect and reverence to people who don't have a lot of money. So our world like equates people's value and worth with their financial worth.
Yeah,
And so that it
unfortunately.
was right. So it was surprising to me that someone would say, the money thing is not what you think. And I was so intrigued. And he said, I need you to go read this book called The Creature from Jekyll Island, and you will change your view on it. Now, that book is a monster of a book. I don't have it on me right now. I actually did the audiobook. It's a 24-hour audiobook. I had to break it up over like 2 weeks, and it is mind-blowingly shocking to learn that the money at this point is essentially printed out of nothing. It's like monopoly money or poker chips. And the people who get to print those poker chips benefit tremendously from them, where the rest of us have to kind of work hard and provide labor and energy in exchange for these poker chips. But just because they're poker chips, it doesn't make them like actually representations of real value. So this made me wonder, like, all right, if the dollar system is broken because it's not really backed by anything tangible of value, what is a better alternative? And I had heard about crypto, but I had zero interest in it, didn't really care, I wasn't a money person. So I was like, the idea of caring about crypto, I was not like a stock investor or any kind of that kind of stuff. But I got intrigued with, well, from a geopolitical and like societal issue, if the dollar system is damaging to all of us, what is a better alternative? So first I found Bitcoin. And then I'm a business coach, so I know loads of other coaches, and I joined a coaching program for crypto stuff. And dove deep, obsessively deep into understanding like what are cryptocurrencies, what problems are they solving, and are they the solution to this money problem? And what I learned pretty quickly too is that the crypto world I'm a marketer, so they had some world-class marketing things going on that surprised me, because everyone thought that this Bitcoin thing was like this grassroots movement that like returning power to the people, and this sort of anonymous benevolent guy named Satoshi Nakamoto had created this technology that was going to liberate people. But what I found just shocking pretty quickly was like all the Bitcoin people, like they're on message. They use the same branding. Like they act like they work at a company that has very coordinated brand messaging, which most companies do. But when I would bring this up, the crypto bros would get very upset because they're like, no, this is, we're going to be our own bank. We're going to operate outside the banking system, and we're going to be liberated from this dollar sort of tyranny. And on some levels, I agreed with them that the dollar system was very flawed. But the problem with Bitcoin, there's a couple problems. One is we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. And that's a problem, which I'll get to later on. And two, if you actually use something like Bitcoin, it's pretty slow. Now, it's faster than moving money in the banking system, but it's not as fast as many of these other technologies. And it's also expensive. It can be, like $5, $10 for a transaction. So if I was an employer, that's the other thing, is the Bitcoin community never looks at these problems from the perspective of employers. And at this point, most people have jobs, and a lot of people work at companies that have a lot of employees. So if I work at a company that has, 1,000 employees, I'm not going to pay a $5 transaction fee every time I have to do payroll for each person. Right. It's just impractical. So this brought me to like, let's figure out what all these other blockchains are. And I like to make infographics, and I write sort of reports. So as I was learning about all these blockchain technologies, I made an infographic on each one of them. And I would show them to the coaching program. Everybody loved them. It was, I got a little dopamine hit from that. And I went through all of the like top 10 or top 12 blockchains. And as I was going through the list, the coaches were like, oh yeah, do this one. This one's Luna. This one's Phantom. Got Avalanche, Solana. And I did things on all of them. They're like, but don't worry about the XRP. Skip that one. We don't like that one. I was like, why don't you like that one? They're like, that's the banker's coin. That's against all of these ethos and philosophies that we hold valuable. So I was like, all right, fine. So I skip XRP, and I get to the end, and I'm like, I'm not terribly OCD as a person, but like I had this OCD thing of like, I can't just like skip one of them, because what if somebody asks me about this one? Why would I don't have a logical explanation for why I would skip it. And at the time, I then had started a coaching program for women, mostly women over 40 who were curious about crypto, but felt intimidated in a lot of these like young crypto bro communities where there was a lot of jargon, and they weren't very kind of welcoming to women who were a little intimidated by this new world. Sure. So a bunch of female coaches that I knew were like, hey, we see that you're doing all these infographics and you're learning all about it. Will you teach us? And I was like, all right. I'm like, I'm no expert. I'm learning as I go, and I'll teach you what I learned. And they're like, perfect. So I knew that they were going to ask me about all the top 10. So I decided I'm going to do one on XRP. Okay. And what was crazy is that I had done so many of these, and all these blockchains were pretty much the same. It was like ice cream flavors, like they're all ice cream, but one's got nuts, one's got cookies in it, whatever.
I love that description, Molly, because I think for people who don't understand it, that says it all. You know what I mean? Like that's a great analogy.
Thank you. And there aren't tremendous differences between like Avalanche and Solana, for example. They have their nuances, but ultimately they are fast blockchains that have certain technical features and a way of, keeping the accounting ledgers updated. There wasn't too much difference. And then I get to XRP, and I immediately find two things. One is this scandal called Eth Gate, and the other one is this very controversial thing called the XRP buyback. And I was fascinated because none of these other blockchains had any like juicy scandals. They were actually kind of boring for the most part. So I was like, wow, this is interesting. We have some some drama here, like what's going on? And so I dug deeply into understanding like what is this Eth Gate scandal? I've now been in a documentary along with my business partner Jimmy Valley about this Eth Gate scandal. So it's funny that it was one of the first things I found regarding XRP, and also Jimmy's XRP buyback. And so what had happened, just to kind of catch people up on it, is as this blockchain technology was being built, the banking system was aware that their technology is very outdated. It's actually hundreds of years old for the most part. They don't really like Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple, has famously said, like, if you want to send money from New York to London, it's actually faster to get cash and go get on a plane and fly it than it is to actually move it through the banking system. Money doesn't actually get moved in the old banking system. It's just a series of accounting ledgers where one account on one side gets credited and the other one gets debited. And it's not efficient. A lot of money is held up for antiquated purposes. We don't need to get into that now. And so the banking system has had, the writing has been on the wall for a long time that technology will come along that will change things. We saw the internet change retail. Like 20 years ago, if you said to people you're going to buy shoes online, they would have laughed because they were like, you have to try shoes on. Nobody's going to buy shoes on the internet. And sure enough, we do that all the time. If you said people are going to, New York taxi cabs are going to go away and we're going to have this Uber thing, people would have thought that's crazy, that the New York medallion system had like a monopoly that was impenetrable. So we have seen throughout history that the internet and technology will replace outdated systems, whether or not those companies who are benefiting from the outdated system like it or not. And the same is true for how money gets moved. And blockchain technology is the solution to upgrading the banking system. Well, the banks are like, now that's the other thing. When we talk about the banks, there's like the couple of banks that are the biggest banks in the world who have tremendous amount of influence. And then there's lots of little banks that sort of are struggling to survive. So when I talk about the banks, I'm referring to the big ones, JP Morgan, Citibank, HSBC, and the largest ones that have global presence, where they're the ones who are really moving money around globally. And cryptocurrency is sometimes believed to be a threat to currencies like the dollar or the euro. And that's not really true. And Brian Brooks is famous. He's a well-regarded guy in our space. Famously has said that cryptocurrencies are actually a threat to banking because banks are middlemen, right? So let's say you're an employee, you get your paycheck deposited in the bank. So like employer sends money to the bank and then employee gets it out of there. It's kind of this central repository for people to like pay their bills out of and receive money from a paycheck and pay their taxes out of. Well, it's not really necessary because with cryptocurrency technology, my employer could just send me money to my software wallet, like an app on my phone.
Right.
We don't need to go through this bank, and the banks charge a fee. The banks take a cut. So if you don't really need that anymore, like banking as we have known it our lives is going to go away. And the banking cartel has been fighting this because the longer they delay it, the more money they make in the meantime. So this company Ripple had built some cool technology to replace part of the banking infrastructure. And one day they go to JP Morgan and say, hey, we got this cool stuff. Like, will you be our client? Like, we want to work with you because you're JP Morgan. And JP Morgan's like, all right, but you have to give us half. And they're like, what? Half? No. So basically, it's like the mob. They're like, you want to move into, Tony Soprano's territory, you gotta pay up because they've got a monopoly on it. And the funny thing is that the way we learned about how this worked is from a series of videos that Gary Gensler, who is about to leave the SEC, but has been the chairman of the SEC for the last couple of years. He used to teach at MIT and has a bunch of classes online that you can watch. And in one of these, he explains how the banking monopoly works, and that if you want to be an entrant into that market, you have to pay them a substantial amount, like half. So this wasn't like a conspiracy theory that we made up about how this world works. Literally, the head of the SEC, who was an MIT professor, is on video explaining this. So back to Ripple, they're like, well, we're not going to give you half. And again, I'm filling in some dots here because Ripple hasn't publicly like confirmed all this, but we have a movie that covers it that Ripple's in. So You do the math.
Right.
So Ripple said, we're not going to give you half. Screw you, basically. And JP Morgan's all right, fine. If you're not going to do that, well, we're going to make your life hard. And shortly thereafter, the SEC sued Ripple. And one of the sort of, and their intention was they were going to slow down Ripple's success to buy time to build a competitive alternative so they could kind of front run it.
Yeah.
And they had the SEC sue Ripple and drag this out. And this was what got the attention of Jimmy Valley, my business partner, is that he's a corporate securities lawyer, worked with the SEC many times, so they were very easy to work with. And generally when there was some kind of a lawsuit, the SEC tried to like settle it pretty quickly because they just wanted to get their fine and move on to the next thing. And there was a whole bunch of weird things that happened with this case that like it was being dragged out intentionally long. It ended up going on for 3 years, which is sort of unheard of. And the only real logical explanation for that was that the banks were trying to slow down Ripple as much as they could to buy them time to enjoy the situation that they have now, and two, to give them time to build a competitive alternative, which is Ethereum, which is another blockchain that they were investing heavily in, but secretly to try to create a system that they owned that would replace the outdated system. And, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, many times would go on to the news and talk about how Bitcoin was like a pet rock and it was stupid and he would fire his traders if they ever owned any crypto. But the whole time, JP Morgan had a division. They were building something called Quorum. They had invested heavily into Ethereum and were sort of working with Chinese company called Alibaba and Alipay to kind of front run the development of this new monetary system. So this became the scandal known as Eth Gate and got the attention of a lot of people who in the XRP world, namely those who were holding XRP as sort of an investment asset prior to this lawsuit dropping in 2020. And they saw the value of these portfolios drop dramatically because of this lawsuit. The lawsuit brought a lot of fear and uncertainty around whether or not XRP was going to be able to be used for its intended use case. And it made a lot of people mad, including Jimmy. So he basically called out the US government on trying to steal the XRP from retail holders by forcing the value to be so low that people who needed money were going to have to sell it at a loss or sell it, at a very low value, which is unlawful and it's unethical. And that is not what the US government is supposed to be doing to citizens. The US government is not supposed to serve the interests of the banking monopoly while harming citizens in the process. The government isn't here to pick winners and losers in business based on who greases their pockets and who pays for, politicians to get elected. So it brought to light a lot of corruption that we have in the US government and how it's unacceptable. And what's amazing about this Eth Gate story is it was a lot of independent journalists, Twitter sleuths, who uncovered this paper trail. And you had a lot of cocky blockchain guys. One of them is named Joseph Lubin, who's part of the Ethereum blockchain, works at a company called Consensus, who loves to talk, and he goes on video bragging about how he's friends with the SEC, bragging about his relationship with JP Morgan. And when all these things are on video and you get these Twitter sleuths put this stuff together, this Eth Gate conspiracy now has documentation that ended up being useful in this lawsuit. Ripple ended up winning. It gave a lot of validation to the people who were mad and kind of pushed back, and that, independent people can make a difference. And that's a lot of inspiration around what happened with this Eth Gate scandal. Now, nobody has been held criminally responsible yet. We'll see how that happens now that Trump is, back in the White House, and whether or not justice will be served for the harm, whether or not the US government will be sued for the harm they did on the XRP holders who got caught up in this sort of battle over who is going to control the banking system. So now that XRP is free from the lawsuit and it has been declared the only digital asset that is not a security other than Bitcoin, Ripple can now move forward with its intended use case. And in the past month, I guess, the value of XRP has gone up 5x, which is amazing because it had been stuck at 50 cents for a very long time. And there was a lot of battle weariness in the XRP community of people who knew that this asset had a tremendous potential, but the US government and the banking cartel were literally like stopping it. And we didn't know like at what point will that end. And when your patience is tested for years and years, sometimes people just tapped out, and those who held on and endured for years have been rewarded recently. And it's just the beginning, because the situation that we believe is going to happen is now, like the beginning of it is now here.
Yeah. Wow, what
Which
a
is very
story.
it's
And I know that there's recently been a movie that, for anybody who, just what you said, the story you just told, and how this all kind of came to light, and kind of the investigation behind it, and all the web that was woven that they all put together was kind of shown really nicely in the movie. I believe it's XRP Unleashed, Rigged from the Beginning, I think is the name of the
Yep, rigged from the
it was
start. So it
Rigged from
initially
the
was
Start.
called XRP Unleashed, but it's really not so much about XRP as it's about this battle in the financial cartel to control the payment rails, and how a bunch of people kind of figured it out and made a lot of noise about that and got the attention of Ripple's attorneys, for example, who were fighting this lawsuit and appreciated all of this evidence that was uncovered to serve them ultimately.
Yeah.
And it created this movement that's referred to as the XRP Army. And I know that's a little controversial because sometimes people feel like army is sort of a militant word, but there was a lot of times where it really felt like a battle. We were battling against this corrupt government that did not care about us, that lied to us constantly, and would throw American citizens under the bus readily just to serve the interests of sort of this elite financial system. And the movie really, it's a complicated story because there's a lot of like participants in it. And I
Yeah.
think the production team did an amazing job of trying to simplify a very complicated story as best they could.
They did. And for a topic that a lot of people may not, understand as well, like as from your experience with a lot of like the women who kind of don't understand it, they did a really good job of keeping your attention and, keeping you like not losing, the audience, for those of who aren't as well versed in it as you are, and to let people know that aren't in that industry what really was going on and why this was so significant, and why the lawsuit was so important about this. So let's just talk a little bit about XRP. We have a nice history about how there was sort of this conspiracy to kind of edge it out, right, in lieu of other things, to keep what we would call, let's say, the banksters, able to do what they do. But talk a little bit about what is so special or different about XRP than some of these other cryptos.
Sure. So to understand why people are so passionate about XRP, we have to understand what the current system's problem is. So for our lifetime, the dollar has been the global reserve currency. And that means every country on the planet essentially does global trade in dollars. Now, what's a little bit clever, very clever actually, is that the dollar is not issued by the US government. The US Treasury does not issue the dollar. It is issued by an independent corporation called the Federal Reserve. And if you actually looked at dollars up until recently, it actually said Federal Reserve note on it. And when you study a little bit about finance, you learn that the word note, it's not like a note card, it's actually a loan. And so the Federal Reserve note is a debt instrument, meaning it's an IOU. And when this debt instrument is issued, there's interest on it. And so we as citizens have been tasked with paying interest on this debt. Maybe we hear about this like the debt problem. And it's like, well, who are we borrowing money from if we issue our own money? Who do we owe this debt to? And we realize we've been paying debt to a third-party corporation that prints the money out of nothing, charges us interest, and now it's interest on trillions and trillions of dollars. It's a huge sum of money that gets paid every year. It's very clever. You'd like take about the evilness out of it. Like,
Right.
wow, so I can print money out of nothing and charge you interest. And if you don't pay this interest, which is your taxes, you go to jail. It's crazy. So But aside from this stuff with the US, so the Federal Reserve can print dollars out of nothing. So when the US wants to participate in global trade, we kind of get it for free because it's monopoly money. And if I can print the monopoly dollars, I can buy whatever I want. Where every other country in the world has to work to participate in global trade. They've got to drill oil or grow food or do whatever that other countries around the world have to do to buy resources for their countries. And what's unfair and crappy about the Federal Reserve system was that it was used as a political weapon. So if you were a global leader and you didn't want to do this dollar thing anymore, and you spoke out against it, you got assassinated. And the media lied about it. So Muammar Gaddafi, when we were growing up in the 80s, was the head of Libya. And we were told in the news he was this terrible, horrible man. Like,
He was vilified.
The world is better off without him. Yes. But actually, what he wanted to do was to create an African currency that was gold-backed, because there's tons of gold in Africa. And the whole African continent could kind of come together with this one gold-backed currency and compete differently in the global stage. And the dollar system is like, oh, no, we cannot have that. And so they vilified him and had him killed.
And,
so they blamed a plane crash on him too.
And if we take that a step further, it's not just about, let's say, assassinations and getting rid of these people who are trying to do something different and compete in the past with the dollar, but it's also been about just toppling their economies too, like completely annihilating what economy they have. And we can point to a lot of places in the world where their currencies have been devalued, and who suffers in the end, right? It's the people of that country. And it's just become a very unfair and evil system that's hurt so many people around the world, which many people don't really understand the root of, how a lot of the problems in the world stem from the banking system.
Vietnam's a great example. I mean,
yeah,
decades ago, the Vietnamese economy was destroyed because of one of these issues. And even Iraq. So Saddam Hussein was vilified as this horrible, terrible man. But what he wanted to do is he wanted to sell oil in a currency other than dollars. He wanted to sell oil in euros, which is still even like euros is like the cousin of the dollar, right?
Right.
And they were like, no, you can't do this. And so if you are a member of this kind of global organized crime cartel, and you attempt to make your move and break free from it in some way, they'll kill you. And a lot of people have spoken publicly about how this organized crime syndicate works. One of my favorite books is by a guy named John Perkins, called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And he talks about how the IMF and the World Bank kind of use money to buy the votes of all of these third world countries in places like the UN, that they kind of put them in these debt slavery systems, and then debt that's unsustainable, and then they have to sort of vote a certain way politically. We saw this happen with COVID, right? Like all of these countries towed the line on the same day. How was it that so much influence was exerted over these countries to comply with what we now know were horrific things that cause a lot of damage to local economies? And well, that's a whole other rabbit hole. But
right.
The money system has been used globally to control the world, and it was the dollar system. And so if that system is not taken out, the powerful countries like Russia and China are going to say enough. So it has long been believed, and I believe this as well, that XRP, which I'll explain in a second, is the solution to world peace. It's the only way that we can free all these other countries from the tyranny of the Federal Reserve system. I also want to separate. I'm a very patriotic American. When we talk about the dollar system, American citizens have not been supporting these policies. The only ones who have were lied to by the media, and we're not fully aware of what was going on. The Federal Reserve is a private corporation owned by shareholders that are not disclosed, but are very likely not Americans. They are very likely European families and ties to the City of London, which is also a corporation. So when I talk about how the dollar system was used to terrorize people globally, Americans were not doing this. I was not doing this. I never supported any of these practices, certainly not after I found out how they're working. So we have this system where the dollar is being used to allow the military of the US to bully everybody to comply with the policies that the Federal Reserve and the owners of the Federal Reserve wanted enforced. So the only way to get out of that is to remove a nation from being the issuer of the global reserve currency. So people have speculated that, as the dollar system falls, well, China's going to emerge and maybe the Chinese yuan is going to become the new global reserve currency. Well, there's this concept called the Triffin dilemma, which makes it very clear that China would not do that. So when you are a country who issues the global reserve currency, your currency is worth a lot. The dollar's worth a lot. You can go to other countries and you can buy a lot of stuff because the dollar exchange rate has often been in our favor. However, if the Chinese took that over and the yuan became worth a lot, the products that China sells, which is like most of their economy is making widgets and whatnot for the world to use, the Chinese products would become very, very expensive and they would get priced out of the market. So China's bread and butter is manufacturing. And if they became the global reserve currency, the world would not be able to afford their products and it would actually hurt China instead of help them. And same thing even with Russia, like Russia doesn't really want this responsibility because it makes their currency too strong. So all of the resources that Russia exports, a lot of food and oil and whatnot, they would become too expensive as well. So it's not, it's a catch-22 between being the global reserve currency. This is also why we saw for the last 20, 30 years, manufacturing in the United States, like went away. It all went overseas because the dollar was so strong that other countries couldn't afford our stuff. So it was just cheaper because of exchange rates as one of the things to manufacture things elsewhere. So we saw the middle America, the Midwest. I mean, I have been living in rural Georgia for years. It used to be a manufacturing hotspot until all of those plants moved to Mexico and Asia and whatnot. So it really decimated like blue collar America because the strong dollar made it impractical for manufacturing to happen in the United States.
Yeah.
All right. So what's the solution? We've clearly seen that the strong dollar screws over working class Americans and it's been used as a political tool for all of these other countries. Nobody wants to take over that role, not just because it's too tempting to have that power, but because it would hurt all of their exporting businesses as well. So the solution is something like XRP, where each nation has their own sovereign currency. So the US will continue to have a dollar, as far as I know, like Mexico will have a peso, Russia will have the ruble, and each country can back their currency with an asset like gold. So there is no more temptation to just print money out of nothing. And when you go to do global trade, so let's say you're Russia and I'm South Africa, whatever, and we want to do trade. Well, I don't want rubles and you don't want rand. I think it's South African rand. So what do we do here? It's like, well, I'll pay you in my currency and we'll go to this like XRP exchange and we'll very quickly swap my currency for your currency. So everybody gets paid in the currency that they want, and XRP is what's referred to as a bridge currency. It's like a go-between where we go to this online exchange called a DEX, and I can swap my currency very, very quickly for yours. And XRP is now this intermediary. And this is when we refer to XRP having utility.
I was just going to say, so it's if for people who, because I've had this conversation with really intelligent people and they're like, I don't get it. And it's almost like saying, there are cryptos that are actually like the equivalent of, let's say, $1. And then XRP is more of a utility that allows for the transfer of whatever the currencies are or whatever the money is from one place to another. Is that kind of like the layman's way of sort of explaining the difference? That you're not going to pay necessarily with XRP, but you're going to utilize it to make payments. Is that a simplified version?
Yes, but that's step one. And the real reason XRP is so valued is because of step two. So in the beginning, everybody's going to have their own sovereign currency. They're going to do trade and they're going to switch their currency. Like if I was going to get paid from you in rubles and I don't want rubles, I'll immediately swap to my South African rand. But at some point, it becomes more efficient because the next day I've got to swap my South African rand for Chinese yuan because I'm buying some China widgets and it goes back and forth. And so there's this constant swapping. And at some point, people are just going to get lazy and be like, why don't I just keep it in XRP? Because I'm going to have to buy stuff with XRP tomorrow. And this is where financial systems and markets love efficiency. And so if there are right now 3 steps and we can move it, or 2 steps and I can move it down to 1, that will happen naturally. And what happens when countries just start holding XRP because they know they're going to need it tomorrow for trade is it becomes what's called a store of value. And so I'm using XRP to do transactions, which is referred to as utility. But because I'm doing so many of these transactions, because I'm a country and we're doing trade all the time, I might as well just hold my wealth in XRP because I'm going to need to use it soon. And I don't want to run out. I don't want there to not be enough or whatever. So if I'm holding my wealth in XRP, I can buy whatever I want in the global market. And this kicks off what is referred to as the virtuous cycle, where you have two competing forces, this utility for transactions, and you have this store of value, which is what US Treasury bonds have been for our lifetime. Like countries and people store wealth in Treasury bonds because it's believed to be a very liquid form of money, that there's no risk. Like you're not going to wake up. We until now, we never thought you'd wake up and the dollar system like would be gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really where this became a very controversial topic in the crypto world and in the XRP world too, is whether or not people believe XRP will be a store of value. Nobody who's into XRP doubts that it has this utility aspect and that it can do these transactions very, very quickly, very inexpensively in kind of an open format. So people not familiar with blockchain and cryptos, they're really just accounting ledgers, but they're public. And there's a whole bunch of entities or companies called validators who are keeping these accounting ledgers up to date. And because there's multiple copies of it and they're open to the public, nobody can lie and say, well, I sent you that money. Well, you got it. Like, oh no, I didn't get that money. Like you can't BS and pretend. You also can't go back and change a transaction afterwards, be like, oh no, you only sent me $1 million. You didn't send me $10 million. None of this stuff that could potentially happen in the sort of secret banking world, that can't happen in blockchains because all the transactions are in the public record. So let's say I'm going to switch tangents for a second. Let's say you're the US government and you're sending foreign aid to some country and they pretend the foreign aid is going to some place, but then we see the records that actually no, it went back to Nancy Pelosi's nonprofit. So a lot of government corruption would not be possible with transparent blockchain currencies, which is why anybody who's into this, part of the shady organized crime government, they don't want transparent money because they want to be able to hide all of their corruption and money laundering. And so this is why having even like a central bank digital currency for the government to use for their own transactions is a fantastic idea because we can see exactly where that money is going and who's spending it and where. So XRP will be potentially the solution to avoiding China or Russia from having to take over the role of world reserve currency. It also introduces this idea of a level playing field where everybody can participate in global trade without having to be in the dollar system. Because if you've ever heard of like SWIFT or sanctions against like a country like Iran, so Iran doesn't play nice with the dollar system. Who knows what the real story is? Because I think the media just lies constantly. But you can get kicked out of SWIFT, which means you're not allowed to participate in global trade. If everything's be done in the dollar system and SWIFT is sort of the way these transactions are communicated in the dollar system and they kick you out, it sort of shows that there's a club and someone's in charge of deciding who gets to be in that club. And I grew up believing there was integrity in that process, and I now no longer believe that at all. I think it's all political and it functions like the mob. And if you do not do what the dollar system mob wants, there are consequences. And other countries of the world are like, you know what? We're tired of this. You all are bullies. You've been terrorizing everybody who doesn't support your organized crime agenda. We're going to have a war, World War III, unless a solution is presented. And the XRP ecosystem is that solution, in my opinion, because it allows countries to hold their own currencies without having to pick one and giving power to this one nation who's in charge of it all.
Yeah, like you said, it levels the playing field. So is it safe to say that this sort of hatred, if you will, because I know that's sort of been like a permeating issue, like where people are sort of hating XRP, is that connected? Is that because of what it would stop or prevent in terms of any kind of, nefarious or corruption? Or is that hatred also permeating even into the crypto world, people who understand crypto? Like, what is this? I've been hearing a lot about like this hatred or this anger about XRP. What do you think that stems from?
Well, you have to understand where a lot of people learn about crypto, especially in the beginning. There are these sort of media sources, right? And we've learned the last couple of years that the media is bought and paid for. And there's very few independent journalists that work at, or very few journalists who are allowed free thought who work at mainstream publications. Let's even just talk about like a Fox News or an MSNBC, right? They're corporate owned, they have talking points, they're not allowed to cover certain topics and they are required to cover other ones. And XRP has been shunned and maligned by the mainstream financial news system, while Ethereum and Bitcoin and Solana are given these sort of like glowing accolades. Well, there's a couple theories as to why. One is XRP was chosen to be the backbone of the new financial system, and they don't want random. I mean, we live in a caste system where the uber wealthy want it to stay that way, and they want everybody else to be like a serf or a peasant. And if you let the serfs and the peasants buy into the new financial system that's going to increase in value a lot, there's going to be a lot of almost like lottery winner type money around a whole lot of people. And, we live in this era of the internet. So if everybody who was a sort of lower middle class or middle class person found out about XRP and they all bought into it, the uber wealthy aren't going to be so wealthy anymore because it's all relative. So they wanted to keep people out by making it sound like XRP was sketchy or shady. There also were, as I mentioned, Jamie Dimon goes on the news and he bashes crypto, while it was pretty common knowledge that there was a crypto division at JP Morgan working on Quorum. They invested heavily in Ethereum. So the sad thing about the last couple of years is learning that this government that I thought was like serving our interests not only doesn't care, but like goes out of their way to make sure people stay down.
Yeah.
And that's where I think there was a concerted marketing effort to make sure people stayed away from XRP. Because also what I just explained to you about this sort of global trade thing, once people figure that out, you look differently at the US government and the dollar system. You're like, y'all have been bullies who have been intentionally harming other countries simply to keep your own interests protected. And that's unethical. And if you're
and
an
as we're
honorable,
saying,
ethical person,
we're not talking about America as a country. We're talking about this private elite group. And, it amazes me how so many people don't even, they use, like, I have a lot of, through my own business as a coach and helping people in divorce, obviously finance comes into it a lot. And I just get so amazed how people, professional, educated people, the way they talk about the Fed. And it's like they think it's just part of the government and it's, and they just don't understand that it's this private corporation. They don't understand that the IRS has nothing to do with our government. It's part of the Federal Reserve. It's their collection arm. And there's so much brainwashing, or the way we've been talked to and indoctrinated about these things, that people don't even question. They don't even look at these things. They don't even ask, is this constitutional? Is it really part of our government? And so there's this aspect that it makes it so easy, or it's made it so easy when you have an agenda with the mainstream media who are controlled and bought, that they're able to now really do a number on people's heads. And then if anybody speaks out against this cartel or this system, it looks as if maybe we're being unpatriotic or un-American, when really being truly American is to understand how the people have been harmed by this banking cartel. And it's really an eye-opener. It's also, causes a lot of people, I think, to have kind of that cognitive dissonance, because it's everything you've been taught all of a sudden being told it was wrong, especially when we think about
upsetting.
Yeah, it's
The first
sad.
time people usually hear about this, you're right, their cognitive dissonance kicks in. They're like, no, that's a lie. That's not true. Then the second time they hear it, they're like, okay, I've heard this before. What's going on? And then when you finally realize like the depth of the lies, and we haven't even gotten into the dark stuff really,
Right.
it becomes upsetting. And people are like, I want to put my rose-colored glasses back on. I want to take the blue pill again because the truth sucks in
Yeah.
some case with this stuff, definitely.
Because you
And it
realize
takes a certain amount of
what a
bravery.
sap, what saps we've been treated like, and how hard we've all worked, and
Slaves.
where is this money going? Like, what, when people, especially today, you go to the supermarket every week, it's more expensive. Education is so expensive, and people are like, what am I doing? What have I been doing? I've been working under the assumption this way, and now I'm finding out it's that way. It's painful.
Yeah, and to find out that we literally are slaves in a system is upsetting. And
Yeah.
most people feel like slaves. There's a lot of people who have a job they cannot quit because they will not survive without it. They're
Yeah.
paid below what you can survive on, and so they're in poverty level, existence, and it's totally unnecessary. And to find out that that's actually been done intentionally
Yeah.
is upsetting, because you're like, why would they do that? And that it gets hard because we are honorable, ethical people who I can't imagine creating a system that would exploit people like that. And so it's difficult to believe that like there are people who have put this system in place intentionally to keep a caste system going and to keep us slaves of the corporation and profit off of us. And it takes some bravery to not only accept that, but speak out against it, because the majority of people don't want to know, sadly. They'd rather stay blissfully or, miserably ignorant, actually.
Yeah, yeah, it's sad. So, okay, so we kind of talked a lot about, a lot of the negativity, but what would you say? Are we in for exciting times going forward? And, you know, what about people who really don't know what's going on behind the scenes? Is there some light at the end of this tunnel? Is there some, happiness that people and prosperity that people are going to experience, in your opinion, from what you know?
Yeah, so the tea leaves are visible at this point. We can kind of see that a lot of things we've been discussing for years are now starting to happen. For example, XRP being used supports this thesis that I explained, that we're going to move to this level playing field, which is actually a line that Trump has famously been quoted for advocating for. And Brad Garlinghouse, CEO of Ripple's, also referred to this level playing field, that those who are on the right side of history understand that like there is this small group of people who have very nefarious intentions, who have manipulated the money system and the education system and the food system and the health system to keep all of us in this oppressed place. Now that the genie's out of the bottle and many of us know about it, if they ever tried to do something like a COVID again, like there's no way they would get the same reaction. There's just too many of us who are awake. The movement to blockchain money is going to be great for us and terrible for organized crime government. As I mentioned before, all the transactions are going to be public. They can't launder money like they were in the past. Moving towards asset-backed money, gold-backed money. There's a whole bunch of states, I think like 35 states or something in the US now have documents about gold-backed money. So each
Yes.
state may become its own republic and issue their own gold-backed currency, which means that the dollar system that really benefited the people who were closest to the money printer the most, it's changing, it's going away. I'm also a believer in Nasara, which is a kind of a controversial idea. I've made infographics on it. It's a very logical solution for the people, and there's a whole bunch of elements to it, but one of the main ones is we were to get rid of the IRS. Income tax is unconstitutional anyway, and was really just used, back in the feudalism days, like when you had the lord of the manor and all the serfs, like you were a serf and you worked your field and you grew your crops, you had to give like a portion of that to the king or the lord of the manor, whatever, because that's how the lord of the manor like ate. He basically stole it from the citizens who didn't have the power to fight back. That's what income tax is. It's literally feudalism, but in a more legitimate sounding package. So when that goes away and property tax goes away, you're like, why do I have to pay tax on something I already bought?
And then the
It's like
question
you're
is, do you
renting
really
your
own
house
it?
from the government.
Right. And then the question is, do you really own it? Because how many people have a mortgage, which is a whole other rabbit hole we could go down. But the whole issue of
Exactly.
mortgages and right. So, I'm a proponent and a believer in NASARA too. And that I think we could probably do a whole other show on, because there's so many facts and information and tenets to it that people can understand. But as you said, one of them is about, the IRS going away because of the reasons that it's not constitutional, it's not even part of the government, right? And as far as, that extending, right, because that's on our income, but then all the other taxes that we pay, where's that going and why are we doing it? And again, it's really coming after our income in some way, shape, or form, right? In these other ways that they
Mhm.
they title it. So as you were saying, that's something that looks like it's going to gel as with part of all
Right.
this.
So
Yeah.
also in Nusara is that the majority of the federal government just goes away, which is what Elon Musk and his Doge committee is with Vivek. Uh,
Yep.
because what's nuts is that the US government is now the largest employer in the world. That was never the intention of the founding fathers. Like, I'm a believer in like government should be as minimal as possible. The government is not here to give me permission to do things. They're not my authority figure.
Right.
I don't need to get their blessing to do anything. And I don't need to document my decisions and choices with the government. All of that stuff I think is going to go away, because if you find out what the birth certificates are really for, like, why do I need a document that says I was born? Like, it's obvious I'm born. Here I am. Like, why do I need to prove to you I was born? It's silly when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Well,
But
what are
there's
those
a
birth
deeper
certificates
meaning to all that.
correct? They're property records. It's like the if you don't understand what tokenization is, it's like literally the token of me as the asset, and that token then gets traded on these markets where they make money off of us, which is a dark, disturbing rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But I'm going to digress for a second. Like about 10 years ago, I worked at a company and there's 40,000 people worked there. And some dipshit in accounting fell for a phishing scheme and sent the W-2 file for all 40,000 people to like a scammer. And these scammers like filed fake tax returns in like everybody's name, like almost immediately. The company owned it and they're like, we're really sorry. We have these support systems in place. Like, call the IRS and sort of figure out what to do now. So I called the IRS and they're very pleasant. I was like, okay, someone has filed a tax return in my, can you check, have they filed a tax return in my name? Like, yes, they have. But the refund has not been issued to them. I'm like, okay, well, I'm me. That's not me. So please stop payment on the money. And they're like, no, ma'am, we cannot do that. But don't worry, when you file your return, we will issue you a refund too. I'm like, I'm telling you that those people are not legit. And they're like, no problem. I was like, all right, that's stupid. You're gonna pay out 40,000 extra, like double refunds or whatever, and you're not gonna do anything about that. That's bizarre. And I said, okay, I would like a new social security number. Mine is clearly compromised. They have my W-2. It has my name, my address, my social security, my income. Like, they could go out and start a whole bunch of accounts in my name because they have all this information.
Sure.
And they're like, you cannot get a new social security number. I'm like, okay. And I was a little bit Karen, like, I'm like, all right, I'd like to speak to the manager, please. I'm going to get a new social security number. And they were so clear. They're like, there is no pathway at all. We're not even having this discussion. You will not be issued a new social security number. And I was like, this is stupid. If my debit card gets stolen, the bank gives me a new debit card number. Like, why is it such a big deal? I had no idea at that time about this whole market where we get traded as assets and our ID number is a social security number. So if you change your social security number, it messes up their whole
Their
shady
whole system.
market.
And exactly. And then even when it comes to, when you think about the fact that, one of the things that was very disheartening for me to hear is that when you're born, right, we're on this maritime, law, which is all about the law of the sea, and where words and semantics mean something and matter, right? We're not on the law of the land or, common law, constitutional law. And, is even like when we're born and we're issued the birth certificate, everything we do from that point forward that we're traded on is traded based on every single thing we do, whether we go to school, that's why our social security number, it follows us everywhere. You apply for a job, you get married, you get divorced, you have kids, like everything is, what's this chattel worth, in this whole system. And people, were sold this whole line, years ago, many decades ago, about why this is important and why we need that and why we need that. And, because everybody is kept down by this money system to just put food on the table and take care of their families, right? And God forbid, enjoy a Sunday of relaxation. Nobody really questioned, and then it's reinforced to us to think that these are all normal things for our benefit, or that we just can't get around doing, just like you couldn't get around getting a new social security card. And if enough people said, well, why? That's where you have the army of the awakened that's happening now, that are saying, no, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't, sound right. So yeah, so it feels like, from between the technology, between the awakening of many people, the Nasara, all the things that go with that, which we'll talk about more at another time. It's like we are moving into, kind of, as Trump said, like this golden age where things are going to hopefully start to really take down these systems that have kept us as slaves, and now be able to give us more of our sovereignty and freedom. Would you agree with that?
100%. And I think Trump has taken on one of the most difficult jobs in the history of humanity, to try to dismantle this corrupt deep state money system and all of the nefarious things that are tied to it. Talk about being demonized at every step of the way. And, he's an older man who's been through a lot. And so the abuse that he has taken, like the last 8 years, especially, has been unprecedented. And you've got to really have a backbone. It's why when people criticize his demeanor, I'm like, do you understand how tough you have to be to do what he is doing? Like,
Yeah.
when people truly understand that, like, I have nothing but appreciation and reverence for President Trump and what he has done and doing for all of us. It's freeing us from a horrible system, and to be on the other side of that is going to be so amazing. I think it's going to actually, I use this analogy a lot, that like, we've all been in prison our whole lives,
Yeah.
and we're used to prison, and it's all we know. So like,
We're
there's
Stockholm.
Taco Tuesday. Yeah, there's Taco Tuesday in prison, and like, I have a little job, and I like earn cigarettes that I used to buy M&Ms at the store. Like, we have this sort of world that we're used to, and we're gonna get told one day we're gonna be free of prison, and you're gonna get out, and for the first time in your life, you're not gonna be part of this prison system. There's gonna be a lot of people who, like, they don't even know what to do with themselves,
Yeah.
because
They're
it's so
institutionalized.
unfamiliar
Yeah.
to not be like a slave to a job you hate, or this sort of tax system, or just be in survival mode all the time, that it's going to take a lot of adjustment, probably even a couple of generations, for the deprogramming to finally leave people, and allow many to be truly free. I also think some people are going to probably lose their mind, and there might be a nervous breakdowns when many people find out the truth. And like, I don't know about you, but like, I got years of like awakening. Like, it didn't all happen at once. Like, I
Yeah.
learned a little bit, and then I chill out. I learned a little bit and chill out. To have to learn all of the stuff that I know, like in the period of a couple of days, you might lose your mind. Because
Oh,
what you believe to
absolutely.
be true is,
It's like
yeah,
waking someone up with a bucket of ice. They'll have a heart attack. So
right.
it's kind of like, I believe the last 8 years, have been about this slow deprogramming and bringing new ideas and concepts to people to kind of, get used to. And then, that you have people like us that have been awake, for many years, or have progressively woken up, through time, that then we can be there hopefully to help these people, because you're absolutely right. I mean, and we're only talking about kind of like the surface, right? When you're talking about the financial system, but then you have all the tentacles that go into the medical industry, the educational industry, the pharmaceutical, how our soil and our food is grown, and then even deeper when you consider all those other nefarious things that have been going on with tunnels and children. And so, to have
Every
all of
war.
that, yeah, it's a lot. So I think that's why, like shows like Mel and having guests like you to reinforce more and more what's really going on, to get people used to it, get used to to see the light beyond the darkness that's revealing itself, is so important, because we kind of, as humanity, we have to really support one another, and help people who really it's just like what I heard this story once. It was a teacher. He had been teaching a certain way, right? He had the books, he had the curriculum, up until like recently. And somebody found a book from like the 1800s, and it kind of went against everything that he was teaching in so many ways. And the teacher was, cognitive dissonance. That's not true. That can't be right. I've been teaching this. So after he had a little bit of time to study this, he said, oh, I saw that. He said, it literally negates everything I've done my whole life. That's really what it's done. Like finding out what the truth is has negated everything I thought I was doing. And that's a psychologically horrible place to be. So, we've got it. I think that's why they've been so slow about the reveal with a lot of things, because they knew we couldn't have a country and a world that would just, break down. It would not be a good thing for anybody. So
I've had many conversations with soldiers, ex-military generally, people who are older now, but their life and career was in the military and they really believed passionately about what they were doing. And to find out that like a lot of that was lies,
yeah,
it's very upsetting. And some soldiers that I know a guy who's still in the military, and I forget sometimes that like they're not all awake to it. And I just casually mentioned something, and it was like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like,
yeah,
"Oh, you're gonna have a sad coming to terms with that you've been used and played, thinking that you're serving this country, but really you're part of this dollar system. You're the enforcement arm of an organized crime syndicate, and a lot of your friends have died unnecessarily as part of this shady organized crime thing that they also like to sacrifice humans to their terrible god."
yeah,
So
yeah,
been tough. So I think there's going to be a lot of facets where the awakening is going to be a difficult process. The food system, the education, like a lot of teachers who've been teaching lies, like to
yeah,
have to admit that and come to terms with that is going to be difficult.
yeah. And a lot of the
And
doctors.
pharmaceutical employees, like companies that work at big, I mean, I used to work in advertising research and we used to do a lot of work for pharmaceutical companies. A lot of people worked there who had no idea what the pharmaceutical industry is really about.
Yeah. Yeah. And doctors too, physicians who just followed because
Sure.
they believed things. And so we're going to go through some, tumultuous times, but I think the more that we can awaken people in a gentle, kind way and educate them, I think that helps. And, the more we can be there for the people in our close circles to give them the support, because as people who've been awake for so long and had slings and arrows thrown at us for being conspiracy theorists and we don't know what we're talking about and this and that, there's a sense that sometimes we want to have that revenge, like, I told you. But we have to kind of pull away from that more high vibrationally and say, you know what, it's like we have to be better than that and just help people get through this and kind of, as hard as that is sometimes, because you want to kind of have that vindication. I think that's the role that we play as people on the front lines getting some of these messages out. So if people want to follow you, or how do they follow you, or how do they get to hear any information that you're putting out there on these topics?
Sure. So the best place to follow me is on Twitter, X, Molly Elmore 22. For reasons I don't fully understand, there's a whole lot of like fake accounts pretending to be me. So just beware, pick the right one. I do have blue check mark, but some of the fake ones do as well. So it's just Molly Elmore 22, no spaces or letter, other things or whatever. And I put out a lot of infographics and threads on topics related to geopolitics, monetary transition, blockchain stuff. And our firm, Val Hill Capital, Val Hill Advisors, a lot of the content that we put out as a firm are published through my Twitter account. So that's the best place to keep tabs.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you so much for all the time you spent today. We really dug in deep to a lot of stuff and you really enlightened us with so much information. I love the way you laid things out. I think you did it in such a beautiful, story way, and I hope people really understand how much is really going on with this whole monetary system now, and we're moving into a hopefully a nice golden age. So thanks again. I can't wait to see you at the summit in March. It's going to be a blast. And
Agreed.
thank you to everyone who is watching today, and we'll see you next time. Give us a thumbs up if you like this. Hey, Elisa V here. We all know that legal matters can be costly and stressful. Finding the right representation and dealing with high retainers and hourly bills adds up fast. But what if I told you there's a way to have legal insurance just like your health or car insurance? Legal Shield has leveled the playing field. From just $29.95 a month, you get access to lawyers for personal legal matters. From traffic tickets to real estate issues or trust matters, help is just a tap away on your phone. Call or text 516-493-1742 and use code ELISALEGAL to start your journey to legal protection today.